The New York Times has a new feature entitled "Devastated Democrats Play the Blame Game and Stare at a Dark Future." In it, the paper interviews several Democratic lawmakers about what went wrong, leading to Vice President Kamala Harris's defeat last Tuesday. Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts spoke to the Times, suggesting his party should shift its approach to transgender issues.
Shift its approach on transgender issues.
Yeah, saying, quote, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenges many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or a formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that? Over the weekend, Congressman Moulton responded to backlash he's received for those comments, including a call from Tufts University's poli-sci department, saying they didn't want their students to intern for his office.
And there you go.
The congressman wrote on Facebook, quote, in a New York Times article last week, I shared my belief that our party has no problem preaching down to those we disagree with, but a serious problem having real, honest conversations about tough issues. I shared several examples with the reporter, including my authentic concerns about transgender women participating in competitive athletics. Unfortunately, the backlash has only served to reinforce my original point.
Let's bring Congressman Moulton in right now. You know, Congressman Moulton, we are the first here, and we've said it time and time again, and we've said it for years, that nobody should be scapegoated. That we should show compassion and love and understanding to those who are going, as kids especially, that are going through really difficult times, and we should lend our support to them, and we don't want anybody isolated. We've been saying that for years. But I remember several years ago saying on this show that a male who transitions after puberty should not compete against young women, young girls, for a variety of reasons. And I cited a Pew poll, right? I hope the head of the poli-sci department or whoever from Tufts that wrote that about you, they need to understand 85% of Americans agree with that. That doesn't make them hate mongers. It just makes them go, this doesn't make sense. And so there's a reason why the Trump campaign spent $30 million on one ad that they played repeatedly on NFL games that wasn't answered about taxpayers paying for transition surgery for inmates. Now, I'm sorry, if you're offended by the fact that 90% of Americans say that just doesn't make sense, then maybe you will never understand why that issue, why the border issue, why the crime issue, why all of these other issues, the defund the police, as James Carville said, all these things added up. And by the way, on this issue in particular, I wonder if they're going to disinvite Maureen Dowd to their campus, because she made the same point that you made in her New York Times op-ed Sunday.
Well, this is actually the policy of the Olympics as well. So maybe Tufts kids are not going to be allowed to compete in the Olympics.
Yeah, they can't. They not only can they not compete in the Olympics now, maybe they shouldn't even be able to intern or work for any Olympic committee.
Right. And I mean, imagine if one of these Tufts students actually wants to intern in a Republican office. I mean, what would these political science professors do then? This is just everything that's wrong with this cancel culture. And I mean, look, we're going to be fine. We always have way more applicants for internships than we have slots from all kinds of universities. But this really hurts the Tufts students who want to just be able to have debates, who want to be able to have different views. And so when people like this in our party try to cancel me or whoever else, they're also talking down, they're canceling the views of a vast majority of Americans. And so how on earth are we going to win elections if that's our approach, that we just want to preach down to people and tell them that they're morally wrong if they don't meet some strict ideological purity test?
Well, again, you can't even have a conversation about it.
That's the problem. And
you can't have a conversation about why Democrats lost. And so it's like they learned absolutely nothing. They're canceling a United States congressman. They're trying to.
You're not canceled here.
No. I'm not worried about it. I'll be just fine. I'll be just fine. But I mean, the founders had this crazy concept called freedom of speech. And we Democrats would do well to remember that foundational American value, because if we can't talk about these tough issues, we're never going to win on them. And guess what? You know who's going to get hurt the most? It's trans kids. It's minorities across America who are going to be attacked by this hateful Trump agenda. And if we don't have a rational response, then Republicans are just going to carry the day. That's what Harris's problem was. She didn't have a response to this issue because she was so afraid to even raise it. And as a result, Trump crushed her on it.
Right. So what's the response and what's the problem with it? Because obviously there is a reason that sports is divided between women and men. There's women's basketball, there's men's basketball, et cetera, down the line, right? So why is it hard to say that two things can be true? I don't support transgender female competing against my daughter having transitioned from a male because of biology and because it crosses that divide biologically. And yet I support transgender people. Why is that? Is this not okay to say?
Well, I mean,
I don't understand.
And I keep going back to what the governor of Utah said, Congressman, which is, he's like, come on, we got a handful of kids. Let's show compassion. Let's figure this.
Did I just get canceled?
Let's figure this out. And that's all we're talking about. If we have the discussion, if there's not this cancellation, immediate cancellation, you have the discussion, then you work through the problems and you get to a point where, maybe both sides aren't happy, but I've never seen a mediation where people leave where both sides are happy.
And most importantly for Democrats right now, we get to a point where we have views that are more in touch with the majority of Americans, which means we can start winning elections again. And when we get to Congress in January and the Republicans control every lever of power in Washington, from the Supreme Court to the White House, the Senate and the House, we actually have a chance with rational policies that are in line with the views of most Americans of winning over some Republican votes to prevent the most harmful aspects of the Trump agenda, which absolutely will attack trans kids and minorities and others across America who deserve our support, who are only going to find support in the Democratic Party today. I mean, that's why I'm so proud to be a Democrat and why my voting record in Congress and my long history of advocacy, including being the leading voice in Congress for getting gay veterans the rights that they deserve when they get out of the military or were pushed out of the military. I mean, I have those positions because I'm so proud to be a Democrat and proud to be the party that stands up for civil rights. But if we can't even stand up for civil discourse, then we're just going to keep losing elections, and a lot of people in America are going to get hurt.
Congressman, good morning. Great to have you with us. Obviously, this election and Donald Trump's sweep of the swing states, although many, as we said earlier, were very close, still in line with the polling, is about much more than the one trans sports ad that aired and the one trans prisoner ad that had Kamala Harris in her own words. So as you sit and look through the data and you look that even in urban areas, even in Boston, in Detroit, and Philly, that people move toward Donald Trump in ways they haven't previously, how are you diagnosing this, and where do you begin as a Democrat to say, guys, here's where we kind of get ourselves out of the wilderness? What are those first steps?
It's a great question. I mean, we begin by doing more listening and less preaching, listening to American voters, because, I raised the trans issue as just one example of an issue where Democrats are out of touch. And if you look at, our views on the economy, for example, I mean, we have a good economic plan that will continue to bring down inflation. Trump's plan is to put in tariffs and tax cuts for the rich that will clearly raise prices for the majority of Americans, and yet Americans don't trust us on the economy. Trump has a radical proposal to disrupt millions of American families and communities by deporting hundreds of thousands of immigrants. And if he gets through, if he succeeds in that radical immigration agenda, it will be terrible for America. But yet Americans trust the Republicans more on immigration. And that's because we haven't been able to listen to Americans and actually, understand them at a cultural level. So I think that a big part of this election was just a cultural mismatch where they look at the Democratic Party and feel that we're out of touch. And look, the same people that have been trying to cancel me over just trying to raise this debate on a variety of issues, they're the same folks who said there's no problem at the border, we can just ignore it. They're the same people who attacked me when I said Biden should step down as one of the first members of Congress to do so, to give us a chance in this election. These are the same people who told us to defund the police. If the radical left continues to define the Democratic Party, then we're just going to keep continuing to lose. So we've got to have these debates. That's the first thing we do, and we start by listening to Americans.
Well, and Mike Barnicle, this isn't like Monday morning quarterbacking. I mean, this is stuff that we've been talking about for years. Willie and I, time and time again, have been talking about the smash and grabs in California, the ability that people are able to steal up to $1,000 of merchandise and not even be charged with a felony. We talked about the insanity of those laws, the insanity of the so-called criminal justice reform, that it only made Americans less safe. It only devalued property rights. And we can look at the stats, just like inflation, and see that inflation has gone down, but groceries still cost more today than they did 4 years ago. We can look at the stats and see that crime goes down. People still go into CVS or Walgreens, and they see that, in a lot of places, like New York, you've got toothpaste and mouthwash locked up because shoplifting is such a problem. And they're like, wait, what's going on? And it's the same thing with the border. I mean, I remember talking about the open border back in 21 or 22 and people just freaking out. And, you can't tell people there's not a problem when there's a problem, when they can see with their own eyes that there's a problem. But again, the whole thing is all of these issues we're talking about, we're not just focusing on one of them. It just underlines the fact that for working class Americans, Democrats seem out of touch.